because we're at 10:01. I just want to give it a few more moments in case anybody else is hopping on with us on the call, and then we will get started here. All right. And I just want to remind everybody before we get started here, we do not have any classes in December. We wanted to purposely make sure everybody has a holiday break. So after today's session, we will all be regrouping in January, and I'll make sure you have those dates at the end of class. But no classes in December. That way you all get some time with your families and your congregations. All right, and we're at 10:02, so I want to be mindful of time and we'll get started here. So welcome back, everybody. Today we will be focusing on the second session in our legal aspects of governance module. And today is really going to be the faith-based application of all the content that we learned last night. As many of you know, that was a lot of content and a lot of legal information that we got through. So today's session is really intended to focus on any questions or any takeaways that you want to bring up with your facilitator, John. John is back again this morning, and he will be facilitating this session with us. So we hope to have a lot more robust discussion. And again, if you had a question that we didn't get to yesterday evening, today's session will be the one that you can ask that in. And with that, John, I will actually hand things over to you, and we will launch right into class.
All right, great to be back with you folks. I think let's start here, and I think we'll break you out into groups and just talk through key takeaways, kind of implications, things you learned. But I think it may be also a chance for you to go, hey, I didn't understand this, and raise some questions. And so then when we come back together, I'll get your group's kind of input from some of these things, but then it'll also be a chance for you to ask questions about the material after thinking about it last night or after talking about it in this group. So today is going to be great because it's going to be a lot of interaction and having you folks process this and seek to apply it, where you are and how it makes sense. So Cassandra, let's start by having them break out into groups and talk through these questions and ready for come back together.
And did you want to do that for 10 minutes, John?
10, 15, yeah, right in there. Let's give them.
Okay, let's give 15.
Plenty of time, yeah.
Perfect. All right, and here we go.
All right, welcome back, folks. Do we have everybody, Cassandra?
Yep, that's everyone.
Okay. All right. Let's see what kind of vigorous discussion we had. But how about room one? Anne, Edward, Matthew, Nicole, Vicky. What can you share from your discussion? What you learned? Key takeaways.
Well, Matthew reminded us of the three modes of talking: generative and strategic and judiciary, and or accountability. And we kind of like that discussion, and we're interested in how it works out sometimes that people get talking at cost purposes, but they're just thinking in one of those modes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think it'll be fun for you to use that kind of insight, or, as you're sitting in a discussion of a committee or board or group and identifying, hey, they're really coming at it from an accountability standpoint, you know,
Right.
and so I think that's that's gonna be an interesting framework as you observe and engage. Nice.
We also talked a little bit about advocacy and how that's defined.
Okay.
As you told us.
Yeah.
And was raising the 15% rule being really an interesting guide on the approach of an institution to that subject.
Good.
We also talked a bit about board development and how Episcopalians function specifically, and we went back to a little bit of that, the relationship of the rector to the board or the rector to the vestry, and the particularities of that and what happens in our polity that's slightly different from other nonprofits and even some other churches. Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah.
What else we talk about?
We talked a little bit about tax implications for renting out things. And I'll have a question about that a little later, but not right now.
Well, I don't know. Ask your question. I'm good.
Oh, well, we have an apartment that originally was put together so that the section could live there. But we couldn't find a section that wanted to live there. So now we've hired a rental agency to rent it out to a young couple. And I think all we have to do is worry about the county property tax on that. But we're still making sure that we know what we're doing there.
Yeah.
Maybe you have some guidance for us.
Well, I mean, the county should want people to live there, right? I mean, so, and it's not a substantial part. I mean, is it part of the same facility or is it a
Yes,
completely
yes.
separate? Yeah.
No,
So
we call it the upper room. It's over the parish hall.
So first off, that sounds like a great Airbnb experience. So you can sell it that way. But yes, so actually overall, it's really not hindering your use of the property
No.
for exempt purposes. So it should be a non-issue to the county.
All right.
That's how I would approach it.
Okay.
So it's
I would add that we had a rectory that we rented, and you need to make sure you look at your rental laws wherever you're located, because we were in San Francisco and couldn't get the renters out,
Oh, yeah.
that is such
and
a
it
good point.
cost a lot of money.
That is such a good point.
So it's not that we don't want people to, we don't want to not provide housing for people, but the church has to protect itself as well.
Yes. No, that's a great point. And there may be ways to, have facilities, and in that case where it's more like an apartment, it's hard to, to couch it any other way. But sometimes you can have renters, and you're like you don't really call them renters. It's a license to use the property, and so you're trying to avoid giving them those landlord-tenant rights.
Interesting.
But then the other thing to think about is the fact is, as churches, we're like, oh yeah, we want to help these people, give them a place to stay, and they'll pay some rent, that kind of. And actually, you need to have a good lease, well written, protect yourself, have rights to eject, remove, and execute those, because that's really a stewardship issue on the property. Because your point, Celinda, is that it ended up costing you a lot of money to try to get renters out. So it's kind of a lesson there, to, as gracious as people as we want to be, you also want to be, how's the Bible say it, wise as serpents and gentle as doves, right? So that's why you do want to have a really good agreement, even if you're renting the upper room. So I can't imagine that when Jesus sent the disciples in to secure the room, that he said, these are the least terms we want, so.
How much will it cost me?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What deposit? You need a deposit. All I've got is this donkey. So a few palm branches left over. Okay, room 1. Good work. Room 2. Bob, Kristen, Sarah, Terry, Reverend Lisa.
We spent a lot of time on the rental. I think that was the big thing. But there was some smaller things that we pointed out, or I shouldn't say smaller, but other things that we pointed out and talked about. And one was the ethical and the perception, versus an act, any actual ethical issues, but the perception and how to deal with, perception. I think those are the main things. So if anybody else has more details they want to provide.
Yeah.
Yeah, I spoke up and about the issues of the rental property. I don't think this is something that our church has considered. A lot of the legal aspects, a lot of who to look for, how to approach it. And I'm really appreciate all the insight that's being offered through this. And it's given me a lot more to take back to our vestry and say, like say, I'm trying to find my note exactly. I like the generative issue idea. Let's just go for it. Let's throw it out there, and then we'll talk about this, that, the other thing. And right now, what we're looking at is we have the space. We should use it. Let's rent it. Well, what's that going to do to us? And I think I'll be able to take a lot of this information back to our vestry, and we'll be able to look at it in a little more responsible and cautious way. So
Good.
thank you very much.
The other thing that the church might consider doing is in interviewing a couple of property managers.
Yes.
I own some rental property, and I have a very low cost, if you will, property manager. So it really doesn't break into my income very much. And it relieves me of a lot of headaches, and they do all the background checks and all the stuff that you need to know if you're renting for revenue. If you decide to turn it into some kind of like a 12-step house, like a transitional house, then it's a whole different program, right? So there's a lot of options, but the good lease is the key if you're going to rent it. And I'm not capable of writing a lease.
We did that, in fact, to avoid some of those worries. We hired a property manager.
Yeah, it really takes a lot of weight off.
I think that would be the way to go. That way you've got the knowledge and the experience and the support, rather than a group of people just trying to make good use of certain space without really realizing what's all involved.
And the generative process sounds really good because it is an asset that you have. And what do you really want from it? Do you want income from it, or do you want something else from it?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a part of your mission to do something else?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very and there's an entrepreneurial side to it as well, as you think, okay, what need is there in the community that our space could provide? So there's a way to think about it that way. So it's mission and revenue, right? So those are, I think it's going to be a joy to look back at how you process this and take opportunities, right? Like maybe your community needs a small event space, right, for a family reunion dinner, and you have a kitchen and a room, and so there's ways that you can use it to accomplish both the rental income and a kind of vision or mission. So
I want to add that I think in California now, it's good to go through this exercise just in general, whether or not you have space to rent or not, but for the board, the vestry, to consider how you will respond when you are approached. because in California, I don't know, in every county now, there's this, you have to provide housing for, the community is beholden to a state law, which you provide X percentage of housing for affordable housing. And where that has impact is in congregations where I serve temporarily, where they have an enormous lot and parking lot. And so they were approached by the city council to donate some of that land to this requirement. I think there was a requirement where every county had to submit a plan for how they were going to build affordable housing in their community in 5 years' time. And so that can be a very difficult proposition to discuss if you're not prepared for that. If you're not prepared, if your community has not already sat down and said, with this housing crisis and the way that state laws have been executed and what is required of our small communities. A lot of us have small churches and small communities, but with big lots and lots of land and property, perhaps. And it may be that you can work in concert with the state, but it's good to be prepared for that, be proactive rather than be reactive, and kind of know where your community, what your community thinks how they can participate or not, or maybe in a different way.
That's a great point. And just so everybody knows that providing that type of housing is a 501c3 purpose. Mm-hmm. And there's funding out there. So if you have that kind of a space, you might as well hire a person and do it yourself. And then you're generating revenue that you can use for other kind of mission and church activities. So rather than always giving up the property, you can actually, somebody can develop it for you. So that's a big project though. Okay, room 3. Larry, Layla, Mally, Rick.
One of the things we talked about was maintaining good business controls in times of shrinking resources. In other words, effectively running a nonprofit business, albeit a faith community, but a nonprofit business with shrinking resources, with smaller numbers of people. And we actually started out talking about how the controls of a business, the money controls, the financial and accounting issues become more and more difficult to manage with smaller numbers of people and without an influx of new people. And then that sort of gravitated into the vestry continuity and just attracting new members in general. Ministries that have been staffed by people who have been there forever and are not necessarily as welcome. So we kind of talked around a number of topics of perpetuation of ministry in times of diminishing resources.
Well, I think we all want to be in that discussion, right? That sounds good. I mean, just and I know there's lots of experience in this room. One of the experiences I've had is when I was anxious about, okay, well, who's going to fill this role? How do we get somebody to keep this going? And somebody wise said to me, well, if nobody's stepping up to do it, then is it really something that people have a heart for or is valuable? So maybe you let it die. So that's part of that discussion, right, Rick? In terms of how you process that.
It is, but I'll tell you on a personal note, my career outside of my for-profit world I've really been I've been kind of a gypsy over my life. I've moved on. I haven't stayed long in a lot of my tenure, and that's just the kind of career I had. I don't leave a very big wake behind the boat. That's one of the things I found from leaving jobs is that 3 months later, they've moved on. And at first, I found that very, very debilitating. But now I'm going, no, that's the nature of things. That we do find replacements, and kind of this exaggerated sense of self-importance that I had in my work career really wasn't helping the organization that much. And I think that can carry over into a nonprofit and a faith community mode as well. To like, hey, you want to see what happens when you leave? Leave. and see who steps in to take that place.
I had some similar thoughts. I worked at a large state university, and I recall a lot of initiatives that would bubble up from the faculty because they would get a grant, but eventually that person got a job somewhere else. And the sustainability of that program sometimes had continuity, and sometimes it just fell apart. And I've been thinking a lot about that with regard to St. John's in Roseville, in terms of, as we develop new programs, which we will be doing, how do we maintain sustainability of those programs? And as you say, maybe some of them only need a 5-year tenure, but maybe some are transitional and some are long-term.
Oh, great point. All right, well, one more group, room 4. So Brad, Ian, Jamie, Sarah, Celinda. Can you add to the conversation here that you talked about?
I think
One of the things yeah, go ahead.
One of the things we talked about was just hearing, especially so at smaller churches, a lot of times what happens is the policies and procedures and things, they're more informal, and just being reminded of the necessity of some of those things to be able to communicate to to vestry members, so that it empowers them to do what it is that they need to be doing, and then it also protects the church, whether it's something related to conflict of interest or people using space or whatever that might be.
And let me add another one to that, and that is, it reduces the number of decisions you have to make, right? Like if with a policy, then okay, this is how we're going to handle this. So you can start down at walking through that policy, as opposed to backing up and going, okay, how are we going to handle this? So there's an efficiency, particularly when you're maybe limited on folks, or there's always a arm wrestle over how are we going to do this. So policies can help limit the number of decisions you make on when something comes up.
I also shared that in that group that this is all pretty new information. I've heard some of the terms or names before, but I've never heard them defined or anything. So I'm learning a lot. I really appreciate it.
Great. Okay. Love it. Love to process what we're learning. All right, let me get to where we're at here. All right, so let's talk a little bit, a little deeper dive into vision and mission. So a vision statement is this kind of picture of the future you want to create. Like, what is it that our church or our group or our ministry wants to accomplish? What's that future that you want to pursue? Whether it's the kind of activity, the people involved, the life transformation that takes place, right? The difference you seek to make in lives or society. That's vision. What's the picture of the future that you want to create? The mission statement is kind of, why does your organization exist? Right? A mission statement provides a foundation for whether or not an organization is on track with its vision. So why do you exist is a mission statement. A vision statement is, what's the difference we want to make? What's the picture of the future that we want to create, right? So we used those terms yesterday. So this is just a little drill down on what are those about. So let's give a couple examples. So Cassandra, right, as part of the Lodestar Center, its vision is, right, what's the future they're trying to create, right? That's the point here, is the quality of life in communities is strengthened and enriched through impactful philanthropy and effective nonprofit practice. So that's their vision for your church, for your organization, right? That's why they're doing this class, right? That's why they have you involved for these 2 days in amongst other things, a whole program, right? They're trying to strengthen the quality of the life in communities, your faith community, your small group community, your town community, right? It's strengthened and enriched through impactful philanthropy, effective nonprofit practice. That's the future they're trying to create. The mission statement, right? Here's the one for Episcopal Diocese of Northern California. And it says, the mission of the Episcopal Diocese of Northern California is to make disciples, raise up saints, and transform communities for Christ in Northern California, right? That's why the diocese says they exist, right? And so that's provides the foundation for what it's doing and how it accomplishes, is working toward its vision statement. All right. All right. So, right. So just a couple of thought questions here that are worth, as in your role and who you are, right? These are just questions that you should process. What is your accountability? What's your role to the fulfillment of your organization's mission? Right? How are you doing that? How are you helping to drive others to do that, or lead others, or encourage? Right? What role are you playing? And then how do you measure the impact of your vision? Right? If you have a future you're trying to create in your community, right? How are you going to measure that? So just a couple of thought-provoking questions. All right, so to carry out a vision and mission, right, you have to own it. Like, there's a stewardship that you and your leadership, board, group, church, needs to adopt a stewardship mindset. Like, we own this, we carry this, we need to further it. We need, we have responsibilities with regard to stewarding this, what we have in our vision and mission. And so here we think generatively, right? How do we involve and champion with others? How do we include current members, volunteers, potential members, volunteers, donors, right? Potential new community ministries or impact, right? How the opportunities we have. What's the potential perception of that impact, actual impact, and the perception impact? So these are all part of that, how can we think this way and act this way in furthering our vision and mission, right? You want to review your vision and mission statement, right? Does the vision and mission make sense in light of who you are now and who's involved now, right? So because while you always are supposed to be measuring what you're doing and the decisions you make on a regular basis in light of, what is our plan, what is our vision, what is our mission, right? At some point, there may be such a change and disruption to who you are, but then it may be your community. I mean, let's say that your community has had a just overwhelming influx of refugees or transplants from another part of the country, or what was the lifeblood of the community, maybe a factory or a business, is now shut down. And so the resources, the people have moved on, or they're now in a different situation in their life, right? Always need to measure and review vision, mission. Is at that time at which you need to do that, right? Do they retain and attract, or are they clear and concise? Are they really what you need at this moment and who you are? This is all part of stewarding that vision and mission. So the vision needs to be aspirational, right? It needs to express impact. And most of all, the church is about transformation. It's about changes in people, in their spiritual lives, in their personal lives, in their family life, in their connection with others, right? So that's our vision. What's the future that we're seeking to create? And then mission, why does your church exist? I think we assume what that means. We assume people know why we exist. It's to hold services on a holy day, right? Well, it's more than that. What is that mission? What's the mission with those services? How do those services connect into the mission? Right. So generative governance, this is just kind of a drill down on each of those things I kind of already walked through. Just thinking that process, right? Generative governance. So let's have a little discussion here, if we can, just a few minutes, if somebody wants to respond to these questions of what are some examples of how the board should use generative governance? And I'm kind of thinking in your particular situation, what does that prompt you to think about how the leadership of your church, your vestry or parish would use generative governance? And then what could thinking generatively mean for your church or organization? Any thoughts around those two questions?
And John, while they're thinking about that, there's a question in the chat from Zelinda. And Zelinda asked, how often do organizations formally review their mission and vision?
Great question. I don't know if there's a specific answer to that. But I think that if the board has and leadership has this stewardship mindset, then actually on a regular basis that the board is meeting and they're asking, somebody has this idea, or we're going to do this, or we're planning for this. I think the question should be raised, does this continue to fit into our vision and mission? And then, the frustrations of trying to answer that may realize that you need to review it. So my initial response to that is 5 years. That's just kind of my initial response, not based on any data, facts, or anything other than experience. But I think that there should be an ongoing recognition that we need to always keep that in mind as we're making decisions. but there can be a formal review of what that means. And I think somebody may, as I mentioned in my example, that let's say that there's such a change and disruption to your community or the neighborhood around you, or your maybe several large families that leave your church, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, we're a different group, right? Can we still execute our vision and mission? Is that still our vision and mission? So I think it should be set up for plan for regular review, not every month, not every year, but there should be a plan to review it. All right, any thoughts about generative governance? I know some of you shared a little earlier.
Jonathan, I think we need to give ourselves the opportunity particularly within the structure of a vestry, of a board that meets regularly, to break out of the task orientation. I think sometimes we get so tactical and so task oriented. Oh, we got to replace the doors, and that we don't give ourselves time to think strategically. And I know that some boards, including ours, have an annual retreat or something like that. But I'm not sure it has to be that formal or that large. But just the opportunity to step back from the tactical and the task orientation and think about larger questions like what's on the slide.
So, I remember there was a slide last night where there was a meeting agenda, and one of the items was strategic. Going over. I think that's really important to do what you're suggesting, Rick. And it's so easy. I've been in organizations that do these strategic plans, and they put all this effort to it, and 2 years later, it can't even find the darn thing. I've seen that happen. I've even seen that happen in my church. So it is important to keep that focused and go back to it and see if we're following it. Are we, picking things off of the plan and trying to execute them and all that. So this is a very important aspect of management and gets to the strategic part, I think.
Well,
There's
a couple of hands raised. I'm going to get to those, but I kind of want to go back to Rick and ask Rick, just based on your experience, how would you implement that? Right? I mean, Larry, recognized that on the agenda there was we were talking last night about, with regard to the strategic plan, there should be something touched on about it every board meeting. But what's your thought about the answer to your question?
Well, I'm actually gonna defer to my dean, who has his hand raised, because I think we actually are doing that in our congregation, but I think it's really easy not to.
All right, so let's go to Kristen and then Matthew.
Yeah, I was going to address Rick's question, because I think we kind of were in that mode a couple of years ago, and what we did to get out of that was just what you had on your agenda. We utilized a lot of those good agenda principles. One is a lot of those tactical things like replacing the doors and all those things like that. We put in the operations report, or the the people's wardens report, or the rector's report, and those were handled outside of the meetings, and they were reported on, and all those things are on the assent agenda or consent agenda. And so you're not using vestry meeting times to go through that. All those reports are written the week before the vestry meetings. They're distributed to everybody in vestry. They all read them, and it's on the consent agenda. And before we vote on the consent agenda, it's, hey, does anybody have questions on this? And we'll pull. So maybe there is some tactical questions on something that was on a report. We'll pull that, add it to the agenda to talk about that one specific thing, and then approve everything else, and it's done. And so all that tactical stuff is pushed out of the meeting, and we do utilize our agenda to every meeting we have something strategic that we're talking about. And we're very one is we set up front, this is how we're doing it. We want to consciously be more strategic. So let's put these things on the agenda so we do talk about them. Let's revisit when we make decisions, let's revisit what our mission statement says, our vision statement, and then remember back to this past year at our retreat, or last year at our retreat, we said this and we said this. And so we're always pulling those kind of things into every vestry meeting.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. Matthew?
Hi, yeah, Rick asked a question that he referred to me, but I was thinking of something different, but I briefly can speak to what Rick was talking about. We developed a strategic plan last year, and now we've put the strategic plan report at the beginning of the vestry. The treasurer's report used to be at the beginning of the vestry meeting, the first item, and we've got Rick now as our treasurer and has graciously agreed to allow us to put it a little lower down so that we're not just focusing on finances first. We're focusing on strategic plan delivery. And the thing that I like about that, having that first, is there are reports from different teams that are all trying to work on that. And I'm not actually giving the answers to what's going on. Like I call on somebody else, and somebody else has responsibility and all of the information around that. So that's the way in which we've reoriented our vestry agenda so that it can focus on strategic priorities. But I was thinking of this question about generative governance. And I don't know about other people, but a thing that I've been observing is that post-COVID, with institutions that were perhaps struggling somewhat before COVID, even COVID accelerated a number of processes. And a part of the generative process at the cathedral that we're going through is acknowledging that some ministries are ending, and that's okay, and that we grieve them, and that as we do that, we try and understand what the underlying value that they represented was to the cathedral, and then say, we can achieve that value in a different way, so let's brainstorm, imagine, think differently about that. Often that detail work happens outside of the vestry because it's not possible to have that kind of like long form conversation about strategy in the vestry, but the reports come back to the vestry for their reviews. So one example is our pastoral care with lay people, Stephen's ministry. We drew it to a close last year because it had been running for 20-25 years. And had gone very well and had become a part of the identity of the cathedral, but was beginning to be noticed that it was a burden in terms of training and supervision, that people weren't actually fulfilling. They weren't actually doing the things that were being asked to do in the program. And so we had to sort of step back and say, let's grieve that. And we actually did it liturgically. And we're about to have a new scheme presented because the underlying value that we identified is that the pastoral care in partnership between clergy and laity is the value that we want to honor. And so then there are different ways to achieve that than that specific program. And that's where we are. And it took some brainstorming and some thinking and some permission to grieve in order to be able to tackle that.
Oh, thanks, Matthew. Those are good insights. Very good example. So thanks. Sarah, I see your hand.
Thanks. I think what I struggle with as both somebody who is a continuing board member and was part of orientation and training chairing committee, and then on the flip side, in charge of an advisory board for my own organization, is there. I feel tension between orienting and getting the breadth of ministries, so that way people have a baseline understanding to then think strategically. And especially operating in spaces where my board members are not frequently equipped with all of the details or background or knowledge, how to give them the correct information and best information while navigating a need to have those big questions and those big, again, generative strategic planning. And like, so that's where I feel tension, is that like, you can't, like, you person who just came on, I recognize that you have a deep background, but you don't have a deep background in this ministry. So so again, if you don't understand the foundation, then we can't build on top of it. So I really, really struggle with that.
Yeah. Does anybody have anything to contribute to Sarah thinking on this? It's a real educational process. I think, I mean, it kind of points out both with regard to actually serving on a board or group, there should be more training and education in that process. And maybe even your point is a good point to make in that training, right? In other words, like, yeah, you're smart, you got a lot of ideas, but at the same time, right, listening is really important. So an example in my life, I started a nonprofit on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And one of the challenges on the Pine Ridge Reservation with regard to people of faith is that everybody goes there and tells them what their problems are. And that is not received well. And I think that's a little bit of what you're saying, right? Not exactly, but at the same time, no, let's listen and learn and get understanding, and then walk with people, as opposed to say, hey, I'm the owner of my own company or an executive, and so I know how things can work and should work. So you're right, Sarah, that's an art. Gaining from their experience, allowing them to gain from the ministry's experience, right? That's probably a really important conversation as new board members come on. That should be part of the training. So Godspeed on that one. So Lisa, you have your hand up.
Yeah. So I come to all this stuff from a much more practical, theological perspective than kind of strategic and overall. And my first thought is that congregations spend an inordinate amount of time trying to understand what you articulated at the front end between vision and mission. And I think there's all these workshops and let's get our mission statement. And, while all very worthwhile, it also, you're also dealing with a very small group of people who, your vestry, for example, are right. They're the ones that are kind of, so my inclination coming into a new congregation where they have a mission statement, is just to let that one sit for a while. And what I have recognized in the vestry meetings is, I feel as the clergy person, it's all about formation. There are a lot of people that are serving on vestry because they do bring the skills from the secular world into there, and they can offer financial information or buildings and grounds maintenance and all of that stuff. But serving on the vestry, it's I feel the way that we kind of address what Sarah brought up. The issue is about forming this call that they're serving in their faith, and grounding them in their faith. And I use the very simple vestry handbook that maybe all of us use to give out, and create meditations at the front end. I mean, we're all used to just opening in prayer and then kind of getting to the business of the agenda. And like Matthew said, putting the financial information, being intentional about your agenda and how it flows. to me is connected with the meditation that I offer ahead of time instead of just a prayer. So I use something out of the vestry handbook that speaks to maybe one of their responsibilities of the vestry member. We go through that. Last week it was about planting and pruning, and having people identify interactively with scripture passage that Matthew and planting the mustard seed, and then but also the scriptural passage of trimming our wicks, because we have to trim things back so things last longer, and making those spiritual connections to frame the business that we're going to do in the vestry meeting, and at the same time respecting the time of, if you've allotted 2 hours, I consider that piece, the front end, the foundational work for being productive as a body, generatively as a body, to work through those agenda. It calls upon you then to be very intentional about your agenda, how the meeting flows, how the energy flows, where you're going to spend time that month. This month might not be the time to do the update on the strategic plan, but to acknowledge that we have to put time somewhere else. So that's, for me, it kind of begins in that practical recognition that many people who are called to serve, who are delighted to serve in this capacity on your board and bring their gifts, they're in some way, I feel it incumbent to put their gift in the context of their faith, of what their vision and mission is for their life, how God is using them to contribute and bring their gift and have their gift. They are blessed to be a blessing. That's kind of my framework. So
Good.
it's a very
Well,
practical aspect. Yeah.
Well, actually, it's more than that. And let me just kind of make comment on what you're saying, and then I think Cassandra's going to take us to break. But because yesterday we talked about how valuable or important it is to be organized and prepared and have an agenda and materials out, and to fulfill legal duties. But what you're talking about is really the extra work that's well worth it in creating a culture and in creating a mindset and in creating thinking that's not just, all right, let's vote on this, let's vote on this, let's vote on this. It's like, how can I help people to think the way, generatively, or help people think in ways that are about our mission and who we are, and help them develop as so that's all, like, that's a whole nother conversation. I did the board legal piece. What you're talking about is a board development, right? It's individual development, but it's also board development, because as you take your board through these kind of things that you're talking about, and experiences, and everybody hears the same message and processes things, right? What you're doing is you're creating an identity for that board and its way of thinking, right? Like, my saying has always been, shared experiences create common identity, right? Like, if you ever go on a trip with somebody, you've got that identity with that person and that group forever. And so as you do that with your board, right, shared experiences create a common identity. And as they experience learnings or visits with another ministry, you all go together to see what they're doing and how they're doing their daycare or whatever they're doing, right? You're creating a common identity, and that's what you're feeding into, Lisa. So, all right, thank you very much. I think, Cassandra, we're gonna take a break here.
Yeah, why don't we do let's do a 10-minute break, and everybody will return at 10:20 Pacific time.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, welcome back, folks. So I think let's just take a couple minutes here, and I just kind of want to walk back through the board legal duties again, kind of highlight those. Not going to drill down on them a lot. I just kind of wanted to as we go to, I just want to do this kind of reminder, refresh on those issues. So, right. So we talked about how the board has a legal, moral responsibility for the organization. The first duty is the duty of loyalty, right? As you recall, this is when a board member is in a board meeting, their loyalty there is to the organization, to the church. They may have other interests. Maybe they're appointed to that board because they belong to another organization. Sometimes that happens. But in the church, their loyalty is the best interest of the organization. So this, we spent a good bit of time talking about conflict of interest and the need for a good conflict of interest policy. And I guess I'll make this offer, Cassandra, if people want a kind of a generic conflict of interest policy, I'm happy to send it to them. And so if somehow, Cassandra, you want to organize that?
Yeah, if you would send me a copy, I can distribute it to students in Canvas.
Okay, let me kind of sanitize one, and then you can see what that looks like and tailor it for your organization, for your church. I think that might be helpful. So another important thing I just want to double down on is the issue of confidentiality, and how the lack of confidentiality or recognition that a board member should treat discussions in the board as confidential, because not doing so can erode trust and undermine somebody's view of the board making decisions, because it's easy to divide people on the board based on a position they may have taken that is disagreed upon. So I think that everybody should consider, a board member should consider any discussion in the board meeting as confidential. And so if a decision is made, then the board can decide, how do we share that decision? Is it announced? What does that announcement look like? Who's in charge of announcing that? And so I think that is something that is, you should think through in light of your church and your situation, about how can we have this mindset that in order to have a free flow of discussion in the board shouldn't have this thought of, okay, well, if I say this, then so-and-so is going to tell their relatives or their family or so-and-so. So I think that failure to have a good confidentiality approach undermines the board as a group, and it divides the board and can divide the church as well. All right, duty of due care. And here we talked about how the board member needs to have access to information sufficient to they feel confident in making a decision, right? You always can't, there's so many unknowns about, sometimes about a decision, but if there is information that can be accessed or asked or raised, then they should be able to have the opportunity to ask those questions. And so it's on both sides, right? It's important for the board member to take the time to read materials that they are provided in advance so they can come ready to ask those questions that allow them to make a decision. But then it also is, how can we make that information available to the board members so we can have a healthy discussion. And then we talk about the duty of obedience, and that is the board is the party, has the fiduciary responsibility, has the obligation to keep the organization true to its articles, purpose, mission, vision, and then to be compliant with the law. Right? So it's just kind of a quick walkthrough of those legal duties that we discussed. All right, I think we're gonna do a breakout here, Cassandra.
There we go. Perfect. Yeah, we will send everybody into groups to answer the question on this slide. And John, did you want to do 10 or 15 minutes for this one?
I think this is a pretty interesting discussion. Let's do 15.
Okay, so
Give
we
them
will
plenty of
send
time to
everybody
talk it
out
through.
for 15 minutes, and then we will debrief when we come back. All right, and we will see you all in 15. There we go.
Bye.
Welcome back, folks. Yeah, so let's I think we are stepped away enough from just the amazing life impacting things that happened during COVID. And one of them was this, man, not being able to be together as brothers and sisters. And what does that mean, right? And so I think let's mix it up here. Let's start with room 4. The questions were, what's the impact of virtual versus in-person attendance? How has the combination been used to benefit your church? And what additional steps can be taken to incorporate connect attendees? And I think you probably discussed like how you're changing things up, or what does it mean, or how did you handle it? So let's learn what you learned in talking with each other. So room 4. So Lisa, Rick, Terry, Zelinda.
I yield to Lisa as our spokesperson.
Nice job, Rick.
I'm kind of feeling like I've just done all the talking. So, but Rick started it out by saying how. Well, Rick, say what you said about Zoom, and then I'll go on the heels of that.
Oh, about the teaching?
Yeah.
Because I'm an adjunct faculty at Sacramento State, and so we had to go to Zoom, right? But as we started to come back, we continued to offer certain sections of some classes, in a virtual content delivery, and those fill up first. It's kind of scary. Our students want those because it's easier, and the faculty we all kind of universally agree, yeah, but that's not the best content delivery. That's not where they're getting the students are getting the most bang for their buck, but it's the most convenient for them. They don't have to, they can come in their PJs and they can just do it at home. So anyway, that's just my life in my secular world, but I think that there are some comparisons.
So we were just noting that in the congregations, that education piece has been one of the pieces, at least in my congregation, where we have benefited from the online presence. And I was noting that all of us are here. I would not be in this class if it was not, done online, and I would not have commuted for a live kind of lecture series throughout the year. So in that sense, I think recognizing the benefit of bringing disparate experiences together on Zoom as an education piece, formation piece, that's been one of the great blessings of bringing this technology into the worship experience or into a parish. That being said, I think that you also have to be very intentional about how it is used and to address the issue of everybody just stays at home and nobody is coming back on Sundays and I think we're seeing that generally in the culture, being able to work remotely and just checking in for your church service and checking out. my congregation was completely designed in the pandemic years to just be online. So a number of the experiences that we have in corporate worship were lost to the camera. The altar was set up to be framed in a certain way and lighting a certain way and readers were a certain way. And you just kind of continue in those patterns if you don't stop and think about what you're doing. So we have, although we have utilized the online experience to keep connected with our broader community, but at the same time, we've gone back to recognizing what we're doing in the worship on Sunday itself and how important it is to have people present. So we've just been really intentional about its use. And we have seen both people coming back and our online hits, if you will, has gone up as well, as people find ways to be more engaged using both mediums.
Fascinating. Anybody else from that group want to share or add to that?
Yeah, I questioned and asked for input. How do we get them off Zoom and come into church more often? I mean, I too appreciate Zoom in, certain circumstances, but I like the camaraderie and the personal touch. And I think there's just a better feeling when I'm with other people. Lisa recommended having a one weekend, no Zoom, one service, just throw it out there and say, but that sounds like fun. But I would like to see more people come back. And it seems more of a commitment to me, to your faith and to your belonging, to be with other people and to just get off the couch and do it. So that's kind of where I was coming from.
Fascinating. Yeah. So in that regard, you think, all right, so why is it people like the Zoom, would rather do Zoom than come to church? And so then how can we create those reasons in our in-person experience? Now, I'm not suggesting that you just say everybody can come in their pajamas, right? Or you you don't have to dress fancy from the bottom down, whatever. But I'm just, is that another? Do we get rid of the pews one Sunday a month and just have couches? Do we, whatever, right? Like, is it snacks? So that's, I'm just.
Well, one thing that
you're getting the joke in this, but if there's a thought there too, right? Yes.
One thing we haven't addressed is communion. I mean, and it's like, we are a sacramental, church, and how your congregants have come to understand the Eucharistic prayer and taking communion, how they've kind of reconciled that with being online. So are they receiving when they are at home and going just to the Zoom service? What is that congregation doing with regard to the bread and the wine, and how is that being celebrated at home? And if you're not speaking to that, or if maybe you've landed in a different place, maybe you're doing morning prayer, I don't know, but the the whole idea of our Sunday worship and our sacramental worship with communion is one of that we are celebrating the Eucharistic prayer together and taking communion as community. So how is that being communicated in congregations where you have found your people are not coming back? Are they still getting the sense of receiving the bread and the cup? Yeah.
Well, and that just highlights the fact of the kind of fellowship that we're and togetherness that is essential to our faith. And so we need to lean into that and how we have that happen. So Vicki has her hand up.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk to relationship. I was saying in our group that we are very fortunate in that we have a full-time communications director, social media person. And what I see, what he has done is he will make these short little teaser videos, Instagram, TikTok, but going back to relationship, he will interview our clergy. We have a lovely young curate who's just a dynamo. And almost every week there's a little video with her. Well, people are getting to know her. You know, with social media, it's about the personalities and the relationship. And if you want to draw them back, you have to make those connections with the people who are actually in the church. And I think our person, Eric, has done an amazing job of that. You can get to know our clergy just by watching these little clips that he's done. And it's inviting to people because then they want to come and they want to meet the person and they want to interact with them live. So I think that's just one piece of trying to get people back. It's not just a service being streamed, but you're getting to know the people and the congregation. He also does little short videos with us.
Good. Thank you. Zelinda has her hand raised.
I would venture to guess, and I'm not close enough to the administration of my most recent past church nor my new current church, but I would also venture to guess that some of the people who don't come, we have to remember that most of us were shut down for 2 solid years. So some of the older parishioners certainly may actually have needs that are being unmet, such as transportation to church. So that could be one of the reasons Zoom is important. And I know that, how do I say this delicately? I'm pretty sure that one of the priests that I know is not in touch with those people. Just, you know, so if he doesn't hear it from other parishioners that there's a need, he doesn't know about it. So I would kind of think a survey of who those folks are and if they have any unmet needs. You know, and some people had 2-car families and they've dropped down to 1-car families, and maybe on Sundays the other person has to drive to work or something. So I think there could be some relation, and that builds relationship to have those inquiries, right? There could be some relationship, deeper relationship building with the folks that are actually online to sort of find out why they're online, what's their preference and why.
Yeah, initiate the connection with them. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so the room 3 group, what do you have to add to the conversation? That was Anne and Bob, Layla, Maylee, and Vicky.
I think that what Vicky has already shared is one of the thing that I really appreciated learning about the most.
Yeah, and I want to say that having someone who really understands the protocols, the dynamics of social media is very, very key. We cannot assume that we know how it works because most of us don't. We're older. It's not our generation. And so having someone who does know it and is putting the information out there in such a way that it's captivating really helps. I also want to mention, and I said this in our group, that our online donations really went up when we started having good content. It's all about good content in the social media world. I was telling them that last year we took in $26,000 online contributions, and this was not from people that were just going online that come to church and donating that way. Most of our congregation is older. They donate through checks, they put cash in the plate, but the donations we're getting online are from younger people who don't, I was saying to the group, they don't even always know how to write a check. Everything is digital. No, it's true. It's true.
So you still take cash?
No, yes, we do.
Vicky, I wanted to know, your QR code sends them to the instrument you use for online giving. What is that instrument?
We have adopted Realm, which is a church software. I don't know if anybody else uses Realm, and there is an online giving platform. Yeah, somebody just, Kristen, was that you? Just raised your hand. We used to use Tidely, but we just switched it over to the Realm platform. But we have those QR codes everywhere. They're in the church. They're on. They're next to our stewardship sign. They're just everywhere. But that comes from having someone who really knows how to do this. And it goes back to generative thinking, because I mentioned in our group, can we afford this person? No, it's difficult. He's full-time. But can we not afford this person? Because he is changing the way we do things and the people that we reach. So it goes back to that. Here's the big idea. What's the strategy to keep it funded and keep it going?
Thank you. All right, group room 2, Edward, Larry, Matthew, Nicole, Sarah. We're having a great conversation here. I'm loving it. Thank you.
I'm going to feed off of Vicky because it's the same person that I'm. Eric does a great job with the streaming, and we have several churches that do not have a regular preacher. So a lot of their bulletins will say that if you cannot make the service, please feel free to watch our cathedral sermon. So that's been a great asset, not only to us, but to those communities that, have, we have some that are in the snow country and they can't make it to church, but they can still watch the cathedral video. And he does a phenomenal job. And the other thing that we also do is a Tazay service, and he also live streams that. And we've gotten a lot of good feedback from the online service for that one as well.
Can I just add to that too, Nicole? Something I mentioned in our group that I think is very important is during our service, our clergy, anyone who's making an announcement, they will speak directly to the audience out in the virtual land. In addition to how they're addressing the people in person, they make a very intentional effort to include them in whatever it is we're doing.
I'm gonna ask a question, then we'll go to room 1. Raise your hand if you're doing less Zoom now, or less, I mean, I'm saying Zoom, it could be Facebook Live or whatever. You're doing less now than you were a year ago. Nobody. And then, so then let me ask, I want you to think first, and then I'm going to ask a question, because the question is going to be, what percentage of your participants, for lack of a better term, congregants, whatever, parishioners, what percentage are watching on Zoom? So if you have 100 people that would attend, participate in a worship service, what percent is participating online? Right. So let's start with how many have 10% online or less, 15%. Okay, so everybody is less than 10%. Is that what I'm understanding?
No, I think it's really hard to tell exactly what the numbers are. The metrics that you get often just give you like, who watched for more than 3 seconds, but how much did they watch? And live on a Sunday morning, we get maybe just 10 or 15 people, but by the end of Monday, views have climbed to like 150 or 200. but we don't know if they watched everything, if they just watched a bit of it. So in that sense, it may be as a third of our engagement comes from online, but it might not be.
Yeah.
Really hard to know.
Yeah, I agree.
It might be someone who really liked part of the presentation or part of the teaching, and they want to hear it again. Maybe they listened to it a couple of times. You know what I mean? Like, or did she really say that? I want to hear. You know. So yeah, you're right. That's a fair point.
I also get like lots of people who are shut in at home that wouldn't have engaged otherwise. I also think that some of our communion ministers, when they take home communion, they used to like write notes and take the sermon via notes to the person. Sometimes now they're opening up an iPad and they're watching the sermon later in the day with home communion with people. And I've also had people say, well, if I'm away for the weekend, I really love to watch the message later. But then I think they're just like zoning in on like the sermon often. So that there's a whole variety of things. And I've got some regular people that are shut in at home that have decided for immunocompromised reasons that they don't want to be in a big congregation, and they wouldn't be able to connect at all. So they're still getting a kind of a rich connection.
Right.
And the what came out in our group mostly through Matthew is that at least what I think I was hearing is that you know, instead of looking at getting rid of this, which is probably one of the issues behind this question, I think we just look for more ways to use it, better ways to use it. And for example, we've recently had a couple in our church renew their vows, and so their family on the East Coast got to watch this. And occasionally, if we have a funeral and the family wants it, we'll go in and we'll webcast it, and people that are way outside the local area across the country can see it. So it's very useful in a lot of ways.
No, and that's awesome. From my perspective, I think the point of the question is generatively thinking about a tool that 5 years ago you weren't using. So then all of a sudden it's like, we got to have something. Let's put our services online, to now thinking, okay, what's the next level with it? And I think you're right, Larry. It's like, how do we use, I've been able to watch a wedding that I wouldn't have gone to or never seen, right? In fact, my one wedding was my niece in India. So yeah, it's a tool. So it's one of those things, how do we generatively use that tool effectively and grow in our effectiveness of it, and figure out how we do the personal connection without that tool using us, right? Like, so that's why I'm saying this is a great discussion, because it's really, it's what you folks are not saying for the most part. You're not saying, okay, I want people back, so we're just going to turn it off for good. It's like, okay, how can we lean into it, use it, but use it effectively, and how does it fit with our mission? How does it fit with our vision? So this is a great conversation. So
one of the things, I'm the one who runs our webcast, and I don't care if there's one person on there who's a shut-in, I'll do it for him. It's worth it just for that.
It's great. I mean,
I wanted to follow up on another piece of our conversations. And Sarah, if I'm saying it incorrectly, please correct me. But we talked about doing a viewing party for some of those churches that didn't have access to a priest. And her concern was that it doesn't promote building somebody to fill that need. And then I thought later, like, we have our canon does classes for lay preaching. And last year we had about 20 people get licensed, and that was when it was via Zoom. And this year it was an in-person, and we had 5. So that was, I did notice that big thing, that it does open up a lot more options for people with Zoom and to fill that lay preaching need. but she's very much right that you have to have a plan, a strategy to fill that spot eventually. You can't just use Zoom.
Oh, and it's not, it is about filling it, but it's also developing a culture around the thing. Is it a technical versus an adaptive change? Is it a technical fix or is it an adaptive change? Like, how are you using the thing? Does it fulfill the need right at the second? So that way you're stopping the leak? Or is it that you're rebuilding the infrastructure of the ministries and of the community and changing the culture so that way you're using it as a tool rather than as a quick fix? And that's hard work. Like, all of us went through that process when we shifted to online Zoom, and we then weren't just passively sharing the service. Like, it became more interactive, and that was, again, the technical fix versus the adaptive change. And then now there have been multiple opportunities for adaptive change, and so this is now the next understanding of it. How can we share in each other's resources, but again, not building up or keeping up a crippled and broken system with a faith community that's dying, but how can we use the resources available to us through some of the more well-equipped congregations in order to reinvigorate a faith community, to have it look and feel something different.
Right. All right, so I want to give room one, if you have something to add to the conversation. Folks in room one: Brad, Ian, Jamie, Kristen, Sarah.
Well, I think the only one of the new things that we talked about that we haven't talked about here in the debrief is I brought up the question of the fact that we prioritize the sanctuary over Zoom. So if there's any issues, because we have a squeaky wheel on Zoom and just complaining all the time. And so I guess I posed that question because our rule is we prioritize the sanctuary. If it's working in the sanctuary, or if there's an issue, we're dealing with the sanctuary first. And if it doesn't work on Zoom, or Zoom has some other issue or whatever, that you were just like, well, sorry, our priority is the sanctuary. And so I kind of pose that question of, is that everybody else's feeling, or how do you feel about that? And I think the consensus was, yeah, that is the priority. I was one of those that raised my hand, 10%, and that's counting, because we do count. I know it's exactly 10% because for Sunday service, I'm not counting any of the rewatches and anything like that, because for our Sunday count, that's what it is. And again, of that 10%, like I said, it's more like a squeaky wheel kind of thing. Most people are fine with what's going on with the Zoom. So that was a question that I posed, and we did kind of agree that the priority is getting the sanctuary right and focusing on the in-person experience, and that Zoom's kind of that nice to have.
Thank you.
And I think one of the other things that we spoke about has been mentioned too is, the sacramental nature of the Episcopal Church, and just about every sacrament we have involves the laying on of hands. There's a physical nature, and the absolute sort of essential piece of gathering. So knowing, and this has been mentioned, knowing what you're using it for and why you're using it, not as a substitute for something, but as making something available that may not be available to someone else. Because it's hard to be the church scattered if you're not the church gathered, coming together, doing those things. I think that is our strength. That is what we, as a church, that's what we offer, is the gathering part of it. So just knowing, because when the question was asked, I immediately thought of Sunday mornings, but then there's so many other things that are being done. Even at my own parish, there are 2 morning prayer sessions that are via Zoom. We stream a sung compline service once a month. We have a Taizé service. We have all these things. So I think it really kind of boils down to what are you using it for? What are you trying to do with that?
Right. Yeah, good point. Okay, great discussion. All right, so actually, we're going to look at, and Cassandra, I'll let you make this call. We're going to go into another breakout, and I was thinking this would be 10 minutes, and then we'd come back for 10, 15 minutes of discussion, kind of wrap up. Or do you want to do a break now, or just want to keep going here?
Why don't we put it up for the group to decide? So if there's a shot that we might end a little bit early, do you all just want to keep powering through, or do you need a 5-minute break? Keep going?
Power through.
Power through. All right, we can power through. John, back to you.
Yeah, so let's do a 10-minute on this trust. And this is we talked about trust yesterday, and just want to highlight just really, that's a really important and valuable asset of the church. So look forward to a good discussion in your groups on this question. What happens when there's an event that breaches trust in the organization? What are the ripple effects and internal and things like that? So let's break them out, Cassandra.
All right. Yeah.
All right, welcome back, folks. Good. Let's. What happens when there is an event that breaches trust in the organization, and the impact of that? And let's start with room 3. Anne, Bob, Brad, Matthew, Sarah. Enlighten us as to what we can learn from your conversation.
Well, part of what we talked about was culture. What happens when an event like that occurs, in part depends on the kind of trust that you've built in other areas, the culture of transparency and truth-telling, your willingness to admit what's happened, allow people to talk about and process what's happened.
Yeah, thank you. Were there any real life example that was helpful, or?
Yeah, I had shared about an issue with an office employee, and how we were able to deal with it because there was a culture that was already in place, and that culture included open communication in general. Then also, for me as a priest, to make sure that I wasn't perceived as being aloof in general, that I was accessible, that, people knew they could communicate with me, talk to me, all those things, taking in mind the power dynamic and kind of dumbing that down a little bit, and creating or having that culture available made it easier to deal with it. It didn't necessarily affect the outcome of it, but having that culture was very helpful.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's there's a book. The author's name is Ben Horowitz, and the name of the book is "What You Do Is Who You Are." And I'll say this about the book. He uses the F word a little too much. So I can't say I necessarily am. I'm not going to recommend it on this recording, but you determine for yourself. But I will say that it is probably the best book I've read about building a culture in an organization. What you do is who you are. And he talks about how a lot of companies like to talk about culture and come up with all these things that define their culture, but really your culture is what you do. And you can be intentional about what you do to build that culture. So Brad, when you talk about you had this culture, it's like that culture didn't happen by itself. Right? There were things that were done and built in, and habits you had and approaches and communication style and just trust and things that you built by what you did, or the organization did over time, or other leaders did and you built upon it, right? That really created that culture. And so we build culture not by what we say, but by what we do. And that includes, earlier we were talking about listening, right? If you don't have an open culture by having top-down declarations, you have an open culture by people trusting you that they can share what they think and can talk about things, and it's open, so thanks for that example. Very, very useful. All right, room 4. Edward, Jamie, Lisa, Nicole.
We arrived at a very simple solution, so to speak. Be transparent. Tell the facts, even if it discloses a dumb mistake. Try to just tell the truth. We've got to be straight up.
And allow to heal and know that it might still come back. People will bring up the past. I'm like, it's so no matter. But yeah, it was very much about just continue with the transparency and thank the people for their hard work that are sticking through the muck.
That is an important part, though. It never quite goes away. You have to come back to it.
Well, that's true in personal relationships and organizational relationships, right? So we have to learn from that. But yeah, it's great. And there's a lot of pieces. There's pieces around that as you think about, when you restore trust to the greatest degree you can, or you build trust, and then people remember, well, that's the church where this happened, or that's the situation. This happened there, but they're doing well and they're healthy, and they're, people are being cared for and ministered to. So, anybody else from room 4 want to contribute? All right, we'll give room 1 a chance.
So I can kind of build on the transparency issue we just talked about. I shared in my group that I'm a new treasurer for our church. I've been there about 6 months now. I came into a very challenging situation because our previous treasurer and our dean, to some extent, were not very open and honest about our financials. I'm not saying there was anything illegal. I'm just saying a lot of things were sugar-coated, and it was made to sound as though we were doing just fine. And in reality, we were in quite a bit of debt. And of course, now I've stepped into this and yeah, and the congregation is very suspect of everything because they had no idea. But the first thing we did, we have a bishop who's now our acting dean, because both the treasurer and our dean have left, our previous dean left. And one of the first things we did was have a financial forum and lay it all out. This is where we are. We didn't do a lot of blame or pointing fingers. It was just the facts. Here's where we are. And we have a lot of work to go forward. And we've been putting a lot of financial information every week in our bulletin. When I get emails from people that sometimes aren't always that nice because they're taking out their frustrations on the new treasurer, I always respond. I give them all the facts that I have, and we just keep doing that and trying to build that trust. But it is very difficult. Once that trust is broken, it is so challenging. It's such an uphill battle to gain it back again.
Yeah, great point. Thank you for that. Anybody else from room one? Terry's cat wanted to contribute, but she stepped out of the picture.
I just want to follow up with what Vicky said. The other piece of it is that it's consistency. Everybody, I mean, because we are telling the truth, no matter who you ask, you are getting the same consistent information. It's not a script or anything. It's just this is what it is. And so it's nice that's the part of the transparency, is that because everybody is looking at the same information, everybody's getting the same facts. And it's not an opinion about what was going on. It's just, this is where it was at.
Yeah. Well, it kind of adding to that, I mentioned as we broke out, there's kind of these concentric circles, right? Like, throw a rock in a pool of water, right? And there's the kind of reflect from that kind of goes out in these concentric circles. And that's kind of how it is with trust, or an incident that breaks trust or an ethical issue. Then it's like the person or persons who were directly involved, then the people responsible for them, and then there's family, and there's maybe their friend group, and there's the congregation as a whole, and then it gets out, and it may be community or greater, so then the question is like, so how do you walk through, because there's trust issues at every point here, and it's how far out do you go in engaging in a conversation about taking responsibility, steps that you're taking to correct it, rebuilding trust, so there's just some kind of wisdom and understanding of community that takes to think through, kind of how do we over time recognize that the ripples have gone down, that we're building trust, and it's reaching, because just like the negative side of that violation has rippled out, you want your trust to ripple out. And so it's not, and you have to do that without it seeming like, hey, we're just trying to, convince people we're okay, right? It's like, how is it that you can build trust? And that takes some individual, kind of thinking about your current situation and how that situation impacted your church, your relationships, your community. So there's a lot to think about when these things happen, not just the immediate solution.
No, it's like Edward said about transparency. I'm like, if somebody comes up and asks, you have the discussion. It's not like, ooh, you need to go speak with, I'm not allowed to talk about this. You need to go talk to so-and-so. So it's like, it's transparency. It is talking about it, being willing to answer questions, and and then say, I don't know that answer. If not try to make something up. But yeah, it's talking.
Yeah. And you want a consistent message. And I mean, there are times, at least in the immediate future, where there may be a legal risk. And so you want to say, okay, for this particular time period, if staff are asked about it or something like that, let's direct them to somebody. But then over time, that can be there's a common message and understanding and information that you want to share. So every situation, not every situation is different, but situations can be different. And it all depends on the timing and the moment and what's going on. So.
Right. Yeah. Ours is not going to be a legal issue. So that wasn't, but yeah, I do understand you got to speak to the chancellor. Sorry about that.
Right. Okay. Room 2.
I don't know.
We talked about, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Kristen,
Okay,
Kristen,
it was ours. Go ahead, Rick.
Kristen, Larry, Layla, Rick, and
Oh, I was
Sarah.
just going to say that toward the end of our conversation, we kind of got to a place of real practicality about transparency, which is if you don't tell people the facts, they're going to murmur about it anyway. So you're going to have this backdoor of communications, about 2/3 of which is hot air. And that is counterproductive. So, get it out there. As I said in the chat box, focus on the issue, not necessarily so much on the people. Get it less gossipy, get it more issue oriented, and let people know that that the organization is in fact acting in good stewardship. And I think that's an issue that we talked about, because this is, it could be about other people's money, it could be about their stuff, it could be about their place that they own in common. And so let them know that their stewardship has been addressed, but tell the truth and cut down on the gossip mill.
Yeah, I think that was the central theme that came out of our group. Tell the truth, put it out there, maintain trust by telling the truth.
Good. It is.
Could I add one thing?
Please.
We also have to deal with how people feel. I remember the old saying, if people seldom remember what you said, but they do remember how you made them feel. And these interruptions in trust really have a lot to do with feelings, and trust is almost acted out as a feeling, or we put it the other way, feelings are acted out in mistrust. And we have to remember that too, I think. Acknowledge that it made people feel bad, even if a few people or some policy was the rupture, everybody feels like it happened to them.
Yeah.
Even regular members feel that partly their responsibility that it came out that way. Why do we do things like that? So we have to deal with their feelings too, and that's a little harder.
Good point. Thank you. All right. Well, Cassandra, I think we've accomplished a lot in 2 days. At least I've had a great time. And the discussion has been, for lack of a uncommonly used word, has been robust and just great. So thank you very much for my great experience and the opportunity to be with you folks. So appreciate you, and God bless you, and as you move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jonathan. It was great.
And just as a quick reminder, as you're logging off, our next classes are January 12th and 13th. So again, we have the full month of December off for our Christmas holiday break. And if you do have any questions or need any assistance, please feel free to reach out to me offline. And with that, have a wonderful holiday season, and we will see you all in the new year. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye,